Hi, I'm DIYte. There seems to be quite a lot of confusion about how to paint MDF, so today I'm going to do a really quick video showing you just how easy it is. Now, as with so many DIY projects, the preparation is the key to obtaining a really good finish when you're painting woodwork. There are two approaches you can take to painting MDF. You can take the belt and braces approach where you cover absolutely every angle. That's coming up on the screen now, where you buy a bespoke MDF primer, you apply that to the wood, you then sand it lightly, you then hoover off the residue and rub it down with a rag lightly dipped in white spirit to degrease the surface. And then for the edges, which are ultra porous, you apply a thin layer of wood filler and then sand it down. Then you apply an undercoat, and then finally you apply the top coat. Now, there are some really great websites out there like DIYte. Recommend you apply an MDF primer before applying an undercoat and then the gloss after that. The reason they say this is because the argument goes that if you don't properly prime your MDF first, it can blister up and bubble. However, I'm not going to do that today because I've painted loads of MDF based furniture, cupboards, shelving systems, drawers that I've made in the last few years. I've never used an MDF primer. I've always only used a wood primer undercoat and then the gloss or the satin based top coat on top of that. And I've never had any blistering, I've never had any bubbling, I've never had the paint cracking and peeling off afterwards. So that is why in my video I'm telling you that you don't need to use the MDF primer as an additional step. That said, with all these things in DIY, the belt and braces approach is often the best. So if you want to go that extra step further, then by all means buy an MDF primer and apply that before the quick drying primer undercoat. Full details of where you can get MDF primers will be available in the description at the end of this video, as will all the other paints and tools that I'm showing you today. The approach I take to painting MDF is slightly less involved than what I just outlined to you. Basically, it's a few very easy steps. I apply a quick drying wood primer undercoat to the wood. I then lightly sand that down and sand the edges down. Sand the edges in particular because they're very porous and the grain will really stand up after the first coat of paint. And then I simply apply in my case, the water-based satin top coat. If necessary, sanding down the edges again a second time lightly and then applying a second coat of the top coat to all of the surfaces. And that way I think you get a really good finish without going through all the steps that I outlined earlier. Okay, in today's toolkit we've got a mini roller here. I'm not painting particularly large areas, so this is going to do the job. The sleeve I've got on it is 100mm. This is actually a short palm, it's a mohair sleeve, because I tend to use these for most painting work. They're really good for gloss and they're also, I think, quite good for emulsion painting. If you haven't got one of those, you can just use a standard emulsion sleeve. I've also got a paint brush for painting the edges of the MDF sheets. And in terms of the paint, any quick drying primer undercoat will suffice. You can get these at pretty much any DIY store, home-based, B&Q or your local stores. The one I've got today I'm using is Armstead Trade, but I've also used Johnston's John Krill water-based primer undercoat a lot before as well. People get quite caught up on one product rather than another. To be honest with you, I think they're much of a muchness. This seems to work pretty well for me at the moment, so this is what I'm going to show you today. I've also got a wooden block and some sandpaper. This is actually 120 grade. Basically, you just want some fairly fine sandpaper to sand the edges of your MDF sheets once the paint's dry. One last thing for today's toolkit, it's a good idea to get yourself a face mask. The dust produced by MDF when you sand it can be very bad for you if breathed in, so one of these is a really good precaution, and dare I say it, one that I haven't taken off enough over the years. Okay, paint on the roller and just putting it straight onto the MDF. I'm painting it on reasonably thickly. I basically want a good, thick but even coat. There we go. When it comes to painting on the end grain, you can either do this with a roller, like I'm doing here, or you can simply get a paintbrush and apply it like that. Again, you want a reasonably thick coat. You will find that the paint sinks into the end grain a lot more than it does on the flat surfaces of the MDF. So it's 24 hours since I applied the wood primer undercoat to the drawers. You can see the end grain here is just lifted up. It's actually quite rough. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my mask on, and then I'm going to very gently sand the end grain with my fine grade sandpaper. This is 120 grade, but a lot of people go finer than that. Just that very light sanding makes the end grain nice and smooth. Because the dust created from sanding the MDF is harmful, it's a good idea to have a vacuum cleaner close at hand so you can vacuum up any of the dust that's created. And dare I say it, wherever possible, do the sanding outside, because then you're less likely to inhale the dust. And now I'm just going to apply a thin layer of the wood primer undercoat, additional layer. Just seals the end grain and provides a perfect base for us to then apply the top coat shortly afterwards. Okay, it's now on with the water-based satin top coat. So here are my drawers now. They've had one coat of water-based satin top coat applied. I think you'll agree that the finish is pretty good already. I probably will apply one more coat, and particularly on the edges, which, although they're looking pretty good, they do just need a very light sand to take off the final few grains that are standing up, and then a second coat will leave us with a really nice smooth end grain to the timber. So I really hope you found today's video useful. As ever, if you've got any thoughts or comments, do feel free to leave them below. And if you're new to this channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here.